What's up, guys? Josh Pate here from 24/7 Sports, joined as I am this time every week by Steve Wiltfong, National Director of Recruiting at 24/7. Steve, got a lot of jockeying for that top position, the number one recruiting class as we sit here in May. What does it look like, and who are the players?
Well, it starts in Columbus, Ohio State. They're chasing 24/7 Sports history, Josh. They have a chance to reel in that 2010 Florida class that has set the bar a decade ago as our top-ranked recruiting class of all time. Ohio State's kind of running away with the number one class here in 2021. They have 17 commits to date, 3 5-stars, 11 4-stars, and that's en route to a score of 295.41 right now. Their score right now would place just ahead of their top 5 class last year, and they still have 5-6 spots left here in this cycle to fill. Their average ranking per commit is 95.33 right now, and we've talked about that before on this show, Josh. It's rare to have a class over 94, and Ohio State's actually done that twice. 2017 and 2018 they did it. The 2017 class with Chase Young and Jeff Okuda and all them, J.K. Dobbins, that's still pound for pound our highest rated class in 24/7 Sports history. Clemson actually has a higher average rating per commit than Ohio State right now, and Georgia's above 94 as well. So maybe we'll have 3 teams this year as college football has really become an arms race on the trail, and it seems like these top 100 recruits are looking at Ohio State, LSU, Georgia, Alabama, and a little bit of Tennessee and North Carolina. But it just seems like most of these kids are looking at the same 5-6 schools right now. But looking at how Ohio State could potentially close, a reasonable best-case scenario, in my opinion: 5-star defensive lineman JT Tuimoloau, 5-star receiver Emeka Egbuka, 5-star offensive tackle J.C. Latham, top 247 defensive tackle Tywone Malone, 4-star tight end Hudson Wolf. In addition to those names, an unnamed defensive back. I like Jalen Davies for them out of California. If he waits to take a visit to Columbus, Ohio State wants him to visit before he were to be able to give a commitment. So maybe that doesn't fall in line with Jalen's timeline, but right now he's definitely got on Ohio State's board. Maybe it's Derek Davis from Pennsylvania, but minus those 2 last guys, that would spit out a score of 323.01, which would put Ohio State right on the heels of that Florida class of 324.62 with 2 spots still to go. But if Ohio State misses on some of those names, if JT Tuimoloau and Emeka Egbuka decide to stay in state and go to Washington or just go elsewhere, if J.C. Latham picks LSU or Tywone Malone goes to Ole Miss or Texas A&M, this thing really opens up, and there's some schools there waiting to pounce. And that begins with Georgia. If you peruse over the 24/7 Sports composite 5-stars, it looks like Georgia, from this vantage point, has a chance to maybe finish with the number one class for the 3rd time in 4 cycles. And they've been in the top 3 4 times going into this year. So it's national championship game or bust for me as far as I'm concerned. And this is a class that you're just trying to maintain that culture. But they could land the number 1 overall prospect in 5-star defensive lineman Corey Foreman. The crystal ball is favoring Georgia for the number 2 offensive tackle Marius Mims. It's favoring Georgia for the number 1 cornerback Tony Grimes. The Bulldogs are the crystal ball favorite for the number 1 safety James Williams. Corey Foreman and Mason Smith, a lot of people saying that they're a potential. Hell, they're saying they're a potential package deal. They could end up at Georgia. They could end up at LSU together. The number 2 outside linebacker from in-state, Smail Munden. Georgia's also favored on the 24/7 Sports crystal ball for him. We just got through the 5-stars there, Josh. Then you have the number 3 and number 4 running backs, Donovan Edwards and L.J. Johnson. They're high on Georgia. Georgia leads for Deion Colsey on the crystal ball, Terrence Ferguson on the crystal ball, edge rusher Dallas Turner. And those guys are in the top 100. You keep going down the top 247, the tight end Brock Bowers, offensive guard Dylan Fairchild. These are guys that we think they lead for. Then they're just in the mix for guys like Leonard Taylor and Xavier Sori. So it's going to be another special class for Georgia. Can they reel in Ohio State? Ohio State has to miss on a couple of those guys, but Georgia's right there with Ohio State. If we're pivoting to the ACC now with Clemson, they lose Corey Foreman, and they still have – Corey Foreman decommits from them on April 21, and they still have the highest average ranking per commit class so far. So for pound, what Clemson's doing, they're tracking for another top 5 class and one of the most talented classes in the country. And they could still land 5-star offensive tackle Tristan Lay, a linebacker Barrett Carter, who I continue to love Clemson for, defensive tackle Peyton Page, and cornerback Nyland Green. Those are top 100 recruits that look like Clemson's in the driver's seat for. 5-star offensive tackle Nolan Rucci is another Clemson maybe leads for as they battle Penn State, Wisconsin, Michigan, Notre Dame, and others. Troy Stellato is a top 247 receiver they lead for. Maybe they beat North Carolina for Zaire Patterson, a 4-star edge rusher, and they're in it for Igbuka. So special things happening at Clemson. And then LSU, man, they're going to be fun to try. They're kind of similar to Georgia. They're sitting on 10 commits right now. It's the number 12 class, average ranking 93.54, so almost 94. But maybe they can get over 94 with Foreman and Smith. We talked about them. 5-star offensive tackle Tommy Brockermeyer and his twin brother James have LSU as a finalist. LSU's still working on the number 1 overall quarterback Caleb Williams, although Oklahoma is considered the one to beat for him. We talked about J.C. Latham. They've always been high on his list. Tristan Lay, I mentioned him with Clemson earlier, but he could easily go to LSU. Edwards and Johnson, those running backs I mentioned with Georgia, they also like LSU a lot. So does Kamar Wheaton, another blue chip running back. And maybe LSU can break Alabama and Auburn's heart for JaQuincy McKinstry, who's the number 1 corner in the top 247. Sage Ryan is a top 50 prospect, a very athletic DB trending towards LSU. LSU could have a special receiver class. They already have 2 good ones in the fold. Maybe they get Mario Williams. It's a special receiver year in state with Brian Thomas and Chris Hilton. I think Mario Williams probably goes to Oklahoma right now, but LSU's certainly an adversary there. And so LSU, Georgia, Clemson are probably the biggest challengers to Ohio State for the number 1 class this cycle.
That's wild, Steve. I mean, that's like a quarter of the U.S. population we just named. But what makes very clear here is that number 1 spot, it may not be quite as sewn up as a lot of people think. And you mentioned North Carolina. Let's shift it back to the ACC for just a second. There's several names on the board here, but I'm looking at one in particular, Jahvaree Ritzie. There are ties between his recruitment and North Carolina. Where do things stand there?
So North Carolina has the nation's number 3 class. So we're not sleeping on how good that class is. I just think it's more going to fall in line of being in that 6 to 10 range, which is still would be the best class that North Carolina signed in 24/7 sports history. Where they've really crushed it is at quarterback and on the defensive line, which I think are obviously the 2 most important positions on the field. And Jahvaree Ritzie is one of the best defensive linemen in this class. And he put out a decision date this week of June 12th. And North Carolina is the 24/7 sports crystal ball favorite, including my forecast. I think that between his relationships on the staff and proximity, North Carolina has a lot going for it and program trajectory. But he has some other schools in the mix. He's looking at Georgia. He's looking at Tennessee. He's looking at South Carolina. He mentions Ohio State. And so maybe it's not a slam dunk for North Carolina, but right now I really like the Tar Heels' chances for Jahvaree Ritzie. I know he wanted to take some official visits and get back out on the road, but he's going to announce his college decision on June 12th. That's his parents' anniversary, so it's a big day for the Ritzie family, and they're going to celebrate it with Jahvaree giving his college commitment. And I like the way Mac Brown and the Tar Heels are positioned at this point in the process.
Steve, right now, as I scroll up and down the 24/7 team recruiting rankings, there's some unfamiliar faces in the top 10, and then there are some usual familiar faces. I know different staffs have chosen to take different approaches to what we're currently dealing with Alabama's only got 4 verbal commitments right now. They're ranked outside the top 45, which obviously is going to change in some way. How is it going to change? And when do you see maybe a heating up period for Alabama recruiting coming?
Well, we know it's going to change. I mean, when you look at, again, I'm a big average ranking per commit guy because it really tells you how talented your class is. And maybe your numbers aren't as high as other schools are taking that cycle because you don't have the scholarship numbers or the what's the word, Josh, when you're losing guys?
Decommitments, attrition.
No, not decommitments. When guys are graduating or moving on to the league, attrition. You don't have the attrition that other schools are having this cycle. But Alabama, we know this. They finished number 1 in the 24/7 Sports Composite Team Recruiting Rankings in 2011. And since then, they finished 8 other times. And the 2 years they didn't, they finished number 2. And so history says Alabama is going to finish in the top 2. I don't know if they're going to get that high this year, but it's still going to be a damn good class. And this recruiting juggernaut has started slow in past years. And I joked around on Bama Online's message board with some of the users. They were joking around how they, burn this thing down in the spring. I'm like, yeah, but you build it back up into a mansion by December and February with the guys that ultimately put pen to paper. Look, as you said, they have four commits right now. Average ranking per commit, 94.29, so it's over that 94 range, which Alabama's been there before. And Nick Saban, I think he's preaching to his staff right now to not let the flurry of commitments to other programs influence their staff, on taking guys that aren't in their top tier, and stay in contact with guys you like that may have committed early during this coronavirus pandemic, and stay the course. Because I'm confident these kids that didn't get to take visits this spring and summer, if they're allowed to take visits this fall, they're going to go back out and dot I's and cross T's and make sure they're making the right decision. And when kids visit Alabama, Saban and company have a very high percentage close rates, and they're in on a lot of valued names too, just maybe guys that aren't ready to make decisions. The Brockermeyer twins, 5-star offensive tackle Tommy Brockermeyer, the nation's #1 center James Brockermeyer. I like Alabama for both of them. That's where my crystal ball is at right now. Obviously, they're battling Texas. We mentioned LSU. Auburn's in there, but I think Alabama and what they've done in the NFL draft, particularly on the offensive line, speaks to that family with their dad, Blake, having a long career in the NFL and understanding how important player development is there. They're in it for Corey Foreman. They're in it for Mason Smith. They're in it for JT Tumaloa. They're in it for Amarius Mims. Maybe they even lead for Amarius Mims. J.C. Latham has an eye on Alabama. Terrence Ferguson, we talked about earlier. JaQuincy McKinstry, the crystal ball favors Alabama for McKinstry. Xavier Sorey, the crystal ball favors them for Sorey as well as they battle Georgia and Florida there. Thomas and Hilton, those Louisiana receivers. We've seen Alabama beat LSU for Louisiana kids before, although it's a little harder coming off a national title for Ed Orgeron and company. The Turner kid out of St. Thomas Aquinas was going to visit Alabama right before this coronavirus dead period hit, but obviously all visits canceled, but they're in the thick of it. Cornerback Jason Marshall, those are just top 100 names again. So Alabama, this isn't a time to worry. I think that they'll ultimately find their way into the top 5. I don't know if it'll be a top 2 class this year, but that's okay. That's from very first. I don't even know if that's first world problems if Alabama doesn't finish with the top 2 class.
Now, Steve, you look on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, and there's Tennessee. Tennessee recruiting has been red hot. It seems like every time you and I talk, we say, man, we got to talk Tennessee. They just landed 3 or 4 more kids, and that's no different now. They just landed Aaron Willis. They just landed Caden Salter. You and I had already talked about that. That wasn't a huge surprise, but here they sit, #2 in the team rankings. They got 21 overall verbals. Is there going to be a cooling off period? Is this hot streak going to continue? How do you see things unfolding over the next few weeks for the Vols?
Look, and maybe I'm sleeping on Tennessee for this race for #1, because a lot of the guys that we just went over, Tennessee's on the short list of a lot of those guys. It's just a lot of those guys have crystal ball picks for the schools I mentioned. But Tennessee's got an excellent class. They finished in the top 10 last year. I don't see how they don't do that again this cycle. They landed Harrison Bailey at quarterback a year ago, and now they added Caden Salter on Mother's Day after getting Maurer 2 cycles ago. So their quarterback room is really coming together. They've gotten some big-time difference makers on the offensive line and on the defensive side of the ball, particularly at linebacker with Crouch and Henry Ta'ato. So I love the trajectory of the program, and I think they're going to infuse it with another top 10 class. A lot of speed and versatility in the secondary, and they're upgrading their special teams. But the average ranking per commit is over a 4-star, but it's not in that 94, 93, 94 range where I think you need to be to finish number 1. Now, I don't think they're going to cool off. I think that the next guy to look at this weekend is Gaffney High 4-star defensive tackle Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins, who I believe is a top target for just about everybody in the SEC right now. He's 6'6", 300 pounds. These are the type of wins that Jeremy Pruitt and company need to get to that SEC championship caliber football. And I think they're the one to beat. Tyrion Ingram-Dawkins put out a top 6 last night of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida State, Penn State, and Tennessee. And right now he's scheduled to announce his college decision on Sunday. And if he does so, if things don't change from the time I'm talking to you here on video till Sunday, I think the Vols are in pole position. I mean, he took a visit there in the spring. I think his relationship with the staff, from Coach Pruitt to Coach Ansley to Coach Brumbaugh, is where it needs to be. And Tennessee set the tone in that recruitment. But even if he commits to Tennessee, he still plans on taking a lot of his visits, which brings us full circle, because I think a lot of these kids that are committing early are ultimately going to get back out on the road and make sure they made the right decision.
A ton going on. We still got a long way, as you can clearly tell and hear, until National Signing Day, and he will be there to hold your hand every step of the way. Steve Wiltfong, National Director of Recruiting. That's a wrap for this week's Wiltfong Recruiting Whip Around. We'll see you this time next week. Steve, take care.
Have a good one, y'all.